Chicago Cubs baseball analyst Jim Deshaies kills me. It was a Saturday afternoon and I was watching my beloved Cubs play the Cincinnati Reds on Marquee Sports. Deshaies, who spent most of his playing career with the Houston Astros, was expounding on the merits of someone's quality baby in the bleachers at venerable Wrigley Field during a break in the action. Quality baby has become somewhat of a thing now, and I know that I'm not the only one who waits for Deshaies to spot a kid in the crowd. It also doesn't hurt when the Cubs are holding a 7-2 lead in the fifth inning, and the break in the action is because the Reds were making a pitching change. Just then, my wife of 6 years walked into the room carrying another beer for me and a glass of wine for her. I stopped watching the quality baby and stared at my wife. Sorry, JD, but a good-looking infant isn't anywhere near as exciting as the sight of my wife in a pair of tight, short jean shorts and a tight halter top, braless. Quality baby time, is it? My wife asked as she viewed the big screen. Yeah, but still not as good as quality wife's time, I said as she blushed appropriately and sat down up against me on our sofa. I wasn't subtle as I ogled first her big tits and then the crotch of her shorts. You men are just so predictable, she giggled, making her boobs jiggle with a small shake of her shoulders. We sat silently and watched the Cubs put up 2 more runs before Vivian figured a commercial break was a good time to talk. Q, why don't we go up to Chicago next weekend and do some stuff to kick off quality baby making time, Vivian said brightly. You could do a Cub game and I could do some shopping, or something. I caught Vivian's tone on the or something and gave her the side eye. You wouldn't come to the game with me? I got cooties or something? I asked innocently. I felt her body tense up against mine. Well, I figured we'd each get to do some me things that weekend before we do the old pour the birth control pills in the trash celebration and get on with starting our family, she said, looking at me with her gorgeous smile and her radiant blue eyes. She knew I couldn't say no to her on almost anything, especially when she hit me with that dazzling smile. She'd been owning me with that look for the last 8 years, 6 of them as a married couple. At that moment, however, something didn't feel quite right to me. I didn't discount her plan completely, but I also didn't give it a ringing endorsement. Yeah, we'll work on something. Let's do Chicago, I said flatly. Let's both take off Friday and head up on Thursday evening. I'll make some plans. Leave it to me, Vivian enthused. It was a small blip on the radar and I never gave it a second thought until late Friday afternoon in our hotel room when I clicked on ESPN on the room television. We had eaten lunch at a local diner and then visited the Shed Aquarium. So, dinner and what? I asked Vivian, trying to figure out what clothes I was going to wear for the evening. She didn't answer right away, and I looked from the television to my wife. I was pretty sure I saw her shiver for a moment. Well, for you, it's the Cub game tonight against the St. Louis Cardinals. You're sitting right behind the Cubbies' dugout on the third base side. I figured you could eat and drink there, Vivian said. For me, it's a meal followed by drinks and dancing at one of the highly rated clubs in the city. I'm not sure when I'll be back, and I guess I don't expect to be around too much on Saturday either. Then on Sunday night when we get home, we can have our trash the pills ceremony and get started working on a family. Wait. Are you fucking serious? I'm not letting you slut around by yourself in Chicago, for 2 nights and 1 day. What about us? What about our vows? I practically shouted. Vivian looked at me like I was a slow child in need of an explanation. The latter part of that assessment was correct. We've been talking about having kids when we turned 30 since before we got married, right Q? Well, we're there now. But I've decided that since I'm the one who's going to be doing most of the heavy lifting, I should get a bonus out of the deal. A bonus? Really? I don't recall there being a bonus clause in our wedding vows, I growled. You're not going to be the one to carry this child for 9 months, not going to be the one to sacrifice your toned body, not going to be the one to set your career back several years so you can stay home and raise this child. But I am going to be the one working hard to put food on the table and a roof over my family's head, the one who will have to miss all the great things like a first word. Doesn't that count for something? I asked, just this side of wine. She just ignored my concern like it didn't matter. We've been together for 8 years, Q. In all that time, have I ever given you cause to doubt my love for you or my fidelity? The answer is no, never. So I want something just for me, a bonus, a weekend fling. Not love, just lust, for a day and a half. Then you and I will throw those birth control pills away, and it will be just you and me forever. Damn, woman, I'm hearing a lot of I snarled. What's that old saying, there's no I in team? Well, there's also no I in us. But I guess if you do this, there won't be an us anymore. You're telling me it will be just you and me forever if I let you do this, but what about the next time we want to have a kid? Same thing? Either way, it's not going to happen, in this lifetime. Do you see a lobotomy scar on my forehead? I wasn't asking for your permission, Q. I don't need your permission, she emphasized. I was informing you of what was going to happen. I'm a big girl. I get to decide with whom I share my body. This won't affect who we are once you get past your ego. Not my ego, babe. I would have to get past your incredible selfishness before I had to worry about getting past my ego, I rasped. Maybe I should go find the same kind of fun as you. She looked like I slapped her. The superior bitch attitude she had given me minutes before was gone, and she suddenly didn't seem so sure of herself. She reached for her phone and texted me my Cubs ticket for the night. You take the car and I'll catch an Uber to where I'm heading, she said, realizing, apparently, that I just wasn't that kind of person. I shook my head in exasperation, gathered my keys and phone and left the room, never looking back. I can only assume she thought I was heading to the baseball game like an obedient soon-to-be cuckold. Instead of watching the Cubs live, I listened to the game on the radio as I drove home. Pat Hughes and crew were in fine voice as the Cubbies won another. I really didn't have a plan, other than getting far away from Vivian. It's crushing when your perception of someone takes a divergent route from reality. Vivian Langer was working as a teller at my bank when I went in to cash my first paycheck with the national transportation firm by which I had just been hired. She had only been at the bank for 2 weeks, having recently been hired herself after majoring in finance in college. I was third in her line, so I had a chance to notice the short blonde with the green eyes and what looked like a large chest hiding under her expensive-looking blouse. She seemed to be able to hold a short conversation with her customers while doing whatever tasks they had asked her before it was my turn at her window. You know, your employer can direct deposit your check electronically so you can avoid these lines every Friday, she said to me with a bright smile. I did, in fact, know this, as the company payroll director had informed me when I was hired, but I'm one of those old-school types who like to get their check in their hands. I had worked for my father as a kid in the summers, and he didn't have the electronic capability, so I got used to actually cashing my checks. I was very comfortable with old school, in this case. Besides. Yeah, but if I did that, then I wouldn't have a reason to come in and see you. Vivian, I said as I looked quickly at her name placard next to her window. She blushed adorably and then packed me away with a 1,000-megawatt smile. When she bit her bottom lip, I realized she had some interest in me, as well. I chose her line for the next 2 weeks, even when there was an open line at another teller's station. The other teller called me over, but I just smiled and pointed at Vivian. The other teller got my meaning immediately and nodded back at me. I like to think I'm a calm, rational guy, but I'm also not shy around women. The next week, I asked Vivian on a date. She accepted. Vivian proved to be outgoing and smart. She came from a fairly well-to-do family and her parents still funded some of her lifestyle. I found out when I met her parents that her father, a fairly well-known attorney in our city, had a special spot in his heart for his youngest child and only daughter. I found out that what Vivian wanted, she usually got if Daddy's money and her influence could make it happen. I was on track for bigger things at Bishop Enterprises, which made both Vivian and her parents happy. As our relationship moved along, John Langer made it quite clear that he expected me to keep his daughter in the style to which she had become accustomed. Quincy, be good to my daughter and do the right thing by her, and her mother and I will treat you like family, but treat her poorly, or God forbid, put your hands on her, and you will have an enemy for life with a lot of friends, John told me. Yes, Quincy is my real first name, which is why Vivian and almost everyone else who knows me call me Q. It's a family name. The firstborn son in every Navarro family for 4 generations has been named Quincy. My uncle is still alive, so my parents actually call me Four. Vivian's pa. Rents are the exception to that rule. Everybody else in the Langer family calls me Q, except for John and Barbara. 20 months after our first date, Vivian and I were married in a large affair that boggled my mind, as well as that of my parents. The officiant was actually a state judge, and one of our guests was a United States Senator, who Vivian lovingly calls Uncle Sherm. Before the marriage, Vivian and I had agreed to delay having children until we were 30, so we could gain traction in both our jobs and with our bank account. Her 30th birthday was 2 weeks before our weekend in Chicago. I had 2 suitcases packed and the trunk of my car loaded with most of my valued possessions by the time midnight rolled around. I had called my younger brother, Bill, and he agreed that I could stay hidden at his house an hour away for a couple of days until I could get my life sorted out. He and his wife agreed that they wouldn't tell anyone I was at their house, even if it meant lying to my wife. Although she hadn't yet realized I had left Chicago, probably still busy fucking her bonus boyfriend, I knew she'd figure it out by Sunday morning at the latest, when we were supposed to drive home. I didn't sleep much that night, repeatedly going over in my mind what I had done to suddenly make Vivian believe she needed to fuck another man or two, and that I would actually put up with that. The closest I came to a reason was that because I had gone out of my way to give her almost everything she wanted, she thought I was either weak or submissive. She would soon find out she was tragically wrong. Saturday morning I did all those financial things that seem cliché, like canceling all of our joint credit cards and moving half of our money to an account in my name only. I had no idea if Vivian went back to the room on Saturday and went back out without noticing I was gone, or just stayed out from Friday night all the way to Sunday morning, but I didn't get the first text until Sunday morning a little after 9. "Where are you?" "We have to check out by 11, she texted. I showed the text to my brother and we chuckled while drinking our slush margaritas on his back porch. He got up to check on the bratwurst he was grilling for our brunch. My great sister-in-law was in the kitchen making some homemade potato salad. There is nothing better than the comfort of family when life goes to shit. A second text stating pretty much the same thing came in 30 minutes later, followed quickly by several voicemails degenerating in spirit. Her voicemail at 10 reminded me that she didn't have any way to get home as I drove us up there. Her next voicemail was angry and threatening. The one after that was pleading as she apparently tried to extend her stay at the hotel but couldn't because her 2 credit cards had been canceled. Goddamn, those margaritas went down great. "Not a prayer you'll reconcile with the silly bitch," my sister-in-law Sharon asked. "You two seem to have a pretty good marriage, and I know you still love her." I would have killed for her, and I know that's not just going to go away quickly, but the way she went about it tells me that at best, I'm number 2 on her list of people to love, behind herself. My brother's cell rang at about 5 while the 3 of us were still on the back porch, many margaritas having bit the dust. He showed me the caller ID and raised his eyebrows at me, giving me the option of answering if I wanted. I mouthed, "Fuck no." He flipped the phone to Sharon, who was still somewhat sober, at least compared to Bill and me. "Hi, Viv. I'm answering Bill's phone because the drunk bastard doesn't have the balls to answer himself." "Yes, we know what happened." "No, we don't know where he is right now." "How the fuck could you do that to the sweetest guy in the world, Viv?" Sharon said. I could only imagine what Vivian was telling her on the other end of the line. Sharon rolled her eyes a couple of times and scrunched up her face once. She said, twice and twice more. Finally she told Vivian, "Good luck," and ended the call. "Bought you some time." "You're welcome," Sharon snipped at me. "Did you know you two had a disagreement and you walked out on her without letting her explain? You really are a bastard, you know? You're not buying that." I started. "No, I'm not, Q. Just telling you what she told me, and what she's probably telling others while she's looking for you," Sharon said. "Fuck," I hissed. "Somebody pour me another Rita." Bill did the honors, once again proving why I considered him a great sibling. "Hey, 8 Ritas in, I wasn't going to qualify for Mensa membership." I ignored the hangover Monday morning and got into work at my usual time, although I wasn't dressed for working. I walked into my boss's office and told him I was either quitting or transferring to one of our other offices, effective immediately. "Whoa. You don't give a guy a lot of chance to think, do you?" my boss said snidely. "What's going on, Q?" I told my boss everything, including my half-baked plan to disappear, for a while. If I got lucky, it would take my wife, actually, my father-in-law, several months to find me, once he actually started to look. The only thing I asked from my boss, besides a transfer, was that my employee name be changed to Oliver, which is my middle name, and absolutely no information be given out about me, at least within the bounds of the law. Inside of 5 minutes, my boss had my next job lined up. The Santa Fe office in New Mexico had a slot for me, and 30 minutes later, Oliver Navarro was on the road to a new life. Officially, Quincy Navarro no longer worked in Indiana, and, by a technicality, I also no longer worked for Bishop Enterprises. I started my new job a week later. The company found me a 1-bedroom apartment, which was good enough for my new single life. I also got a new phone and provider, so the phone bill with accompanying calls wasn't going to my wife. I gave out my new number to only a select few people back home. 2 of those who didn't get the number were my mother and father. My brother had told me that Mom had railed to him about what I had done, and seemed to be squarely on Vivian's side. I didn't need to take any shit from her, nor did I trust her not to give the number to Viv. My father was collateral damage in this battle. I knew that if I gave him my number, my mother would eventually wear him down and get it, and then he and I would have had a problem, so I didn't put him in the middle. Bill and Sharon, however, had broad shoulders, and I knew Mom wouldn't ever get it from them. Lord knows she tried, though. Vivian tried as well. According to Bill, it took her about a week to realize that I was no longer in her city. "How can we patch this up if we don't speak, if we can't sit down and face each other?" she asked Bill. "Maybe he doesn't want to patch this up, Viv. You kind of ripped his heart out in Chicago," Bill told me he responded to her. "It was only 2 nights, Bill." "It didn't mean anything," she said. "To you maybe." "To him it meant everything," Bill responded. My career continued on just fine for the next year in Santa Fe. My social life, not that I was looking, was at a complete zero. That was fine with me. I had Bill check for me occasionally to see if I was still married. Surprisingly, Viv hadn't filed for abandonment. I had to wonder why. I would occasionally go with my coworkers for a night out at the end of a workday, but I didn't go on my first date until I was in Santa Fe for about 18 months. To quote Bob Seger, she was a black-haired beauty with big dark eyes, and points on her own, sitting way up high. She was part Pueblo, part Hispanic, with muscular legs that felt wonderful when she wrapped them around me during sex. We went out several times, but I knew she was looking for something more permanent, which I couldn't provide. 2 months later I met Evangeline, Angel Born, while I was sitting at the bar of my favorite quiet pub. She was a quintessential Irish lass, with dark red hair, freckles and bright blue eyes. I was to find out later she also had the famous Irish temper as well. I still had on my jacket and tie, having come straight from one of those days at the office where I spent my time putting out fires, and was nursing a shot of Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey when I heard a woman's voice call out, "The one at the bar's mine, girls." You all find your own, as several women walked in. I guess that the 4 women all came from a shift at one of the local factories, as they were all wearing jeans and work shirts. The one sauntering my way had her work shirt unbuttoned to the middle of what looked like a pair of C-cup boobs. I wasn't too subtle as I watched her tits jiggle as she approached. "What are we drinking tonight, Mr. Fancy Suit Guy?" she asked with a big smile and her eyes laughing. "Tennessee Honey. That work for you?" I asked. Angel and I spent the night talking, dancing and drinking. I found out she was out for a rare night of partying as her 2-year-old was with a babysitter. The child's father was an unknown, she said to me with more than a little embarrassment in her voice. I got a little too drunk, was by myself, and I'm pretty sure I got roofied by 2 guys I was partying with. I learned several lessons that night, the most important of which is that neither me nor my friends ever leave a bar alone with a man if we didn't come with him. We all leave together, or at the very least, leave in pairs, she explained. But my daughter is a gift from God. She is the most precious thing in my life. She took out her phone, tapped a few times and brought up a photo of an adorable toddler. "You got kids?" she asked. "I don't think it's ever going to be in the cards for me," I said, launching into my story of how I came to be in Santa Fe. "Wow. That's terrible. But you're still married to her? You should get that taken care of," she asserted. "I should, but at the time I just wanted out quickly. And then there's the matter of actually talking to the stupid bitch. Angel and I actually went on a few dates alone, and then I started inviting her daughter along to kid-friendly dates. Eleanor was shy around me at first, until I actually got on the floor with her at her level. I had read that somewhere, and whoever wrote it was a damn genius. I instantly became her favorite adult, Angel told me. There were times when Angel and I were snuggled up on her sofa when Eleanor would take one of my hands and tug on me until I got off the sofa and sat on the floor, at which point she'd crawl into my lap like a puppy and fall asleep. That really seemed to impress Angel, but I've got to admit I liked it, too. Angel and I got along well, but we never discussed exclusivity. She had told me when we first started dating that she already had someone she was seeing occasionally. I didn't believe Angel and I were in it for the long haul, and since she was honest with me I had no problem with her continuing her other relationship. You know the old saying about assumptions. Well, I just assumed that Angel's other relationship was with a man whose name was Bobby. We never really discussed Bobby, the way I assumed she hadn't discussed me with him. About 3 months into our relationship, however, she mentioned that she and Bobby went out shopping for bikinis a couple of days earlier, and... Wait. What? I said. Bobby's a woman? Bobbie, not Bobby as in Robert? Well, yeah. Haven't I mentioned that before? Bobby's a woman, a lesbian, and I'm bisexual. You sure we haven't talked about this before? I shook my head silently, and Angel suddenly started looking at her hands, her feet, anywhere but directly at me. Is that a problem, Oliver? She got out barely above a whisper. I really hadn't ever thought about something like that before. I'd known bisexuals, but had never dated one before, that I was aware of anyway. It took me a minute to let that sink in before I realized that it made no difference in our relationship what gender the person in her other relationship was. I don't suppose so, unless she's really pretty. I think for the most part women are more pleasing to look at than guys, and if she's really pretty, then I'm going to suffer big time by comparison. Should I be worried? I asked. She is pretty, but I don't think you have to worry too much. You both literally bring different things to the table. She giggled easily, which caused me to laugh. You sure I never told you before that I'm bi? I usually try to tell all my dates pretty early on so I don't mislead anybody. That usually gets feelings hurt, she said. So now are you going to be wondering what we do when we're out together? Are you that kind of a pig? Nope. I never wanted to know what you two did together when I thought Bobby was another man. Makes no difference now that I know she's a woman. We're not exclusive, and your private life is yours, the way my life is mine. So she's pretty, huh? I tried to look at her seriously, but she knew me well enough to know I was kidding her hard. Who's Eleanor's favorite? I asked in a childish voice. You know you are, she answered back. I actually became Angel's backup person for Eleanor's babysitter, getting written permission to pick up the child on the few occasions that Angel had to work late. I bought a child's car seat for my Mustang and installed it permanently because nobody else ever rode in the back seat of that car. I didn't put 2 plus 2 together when my cell rang a couple of months later and the caller ID said it was Bobby Clarkson. Angel never told me Bobby's last name, and there really was never any reason why she would ever be calling me, except for one. My stomach did a nervous flip as I answered. An almost hysterical Bobby spent the next few minutes telling me that Angel had died in a car wreck on the way home from work. The police on the scene had found Angel's cell phone and called Bobby, who was listed several times in Angel's call history. Bobby had gone to the hospital, but Angel was already gone. When Bobby could think straight for a minute, she realized that Eleanor needed to be picked up from the babysitter, and Angel had once told her that I was cleared to do that. We agreed to meet at Angel's apartment after I picked up Eleanor. Bobby was sitting sobbing at the kitchen table in the apartment when I rushed in crying with the very confused child. The woman ran to us and hugged us both as she continued to cry. We probably stayed that way for 5 minutes, 2 crying adults and a toddler in between us in a tight hug. We finally broke apart when I noted that we had to get the child fed and some things decided. We pieced together some things from Angel's life based on what she had told both of us. She was an only child whose parents had both died, and there didn't seem to be any aunts or uncles in the picture. That meant it was up to us to take care of Eleanor until we could figure out which state agency needed to take over. Bobby had found a couple of cans of tuna and made sandwiches for us and put some in a bowl so we could feed Eleanor. A little more looking turned up a juice box and Cheerios. Between bouts of crying for our departed friend, Bobby and I struggled to come up with a plan for Eleanor. We came to the realization that legally she was a ward of the state and would probably be placed in the foster care system, but neither one of us could live with that decision. Maybe we weren't thinking right, but it seemed best to us that the child should remain with one of us for the foreseeable future, rather than have her turned over to the foster care system. If the state doesn't know about her, they won't be trying to take her away and place her in foster care. She can just stay with us. They always talk about how lots of kids fall through the cracks. Eleanor can fall through the cracks and stay with us. With me, I volunteered. What do you know about raising a kid? Bobby quickly asked. Honestly, nothing, but I was a kid once, I remarked. Perfect. Not exactly the answer I was looking for, she said. We talked round in circles for the next hour trying to come up with a good plan for Eleanor. Eventually, we came to the conclusion that I would give up my apartment, move into Angels and become the primary caregiver for the child, along with daycare. Bobby said she would come by often to help out. We were both highly cognizant of the fact that neither of us had ever been a parent before. What's that old saying? The blonde leading the blind, she asked, causing me to laugh for the first time all night. Actually, that's the blind leading the blind, but your way is funnier, I rejoined. By the way, I'm Oliver Navarro. It's nice to officially meet you, Bobby, I said formally, holding my hand out for a handshake. She looked at my hand before looking me in the eyes. She walked past my outstretched hand and into my space, wrapping me in a tearful hug. God, I'm going to miss her so much, she said. Me, too, was all I could say back. I called into my office the next morning and explained to my boss that I needed a couple of personal days to get things squared away with Eleanor. Bobby and I decided that we would have Angel's body cremated. It took a couple of weeks for Eleanor, Bobby and I to sort of find a routine. Bobby showed up at the apartment almost every night after work, and we split cooking duties for meals. I could see why Angel liked her. She was smart and funny, with a bit of sass like Angel had. She was also tall, blonde, blue-eyed and very curvy. I enjoyed her company and missed her on the few nights she didn't come over. A lot of nights she and I talked about our feelings for Angel. 3 months had gone by when a somewhat nervous-looking Bobby approached me one evening after I had put Eleanor down for the night. I was sitting at one end of the 3-cushion sofa in the living room and Bobby sat down on the cushion right next to me, facing me with her feet crossed under her. Most women can do that pretty easily, most guys struggle with the position without a hard surface like a floor or the ground under them. Yes? I asked, drawing the word out in anticipation of something. Oliver, what would you say to getting a bigger apartment and me moving in with you two full-time, she asked. It would be better for both of our wallets and we could better share with Eleanor. I love the child and I guess I want to be her mother, sort of. And you could be her father, sort of. I know you love her, too. We don't need to be married to raise a child. In fact, with both of us in the home, we could even have our own social lives. And since we're friends, not lovers, that should decrease the chances of us splitting up, like. Alright, you don't have to say it, like my wife and I. Bobby was indeed a beautiful woman, but since I knew she played for the other team, I would never make a move on her, that would be the ultimate in rude. Still, I had grown fond of her, to say the least. Both of us absolutely loved Eleanor off the charts. The plan sounded, actually, it made really good sense, to my way of thinking. Bonded by a commitment to Eleanor, and maybe because there were no emotional and sexual games in play, the friendship between Bobby and I grew tight. The three of us grew into a real family, which only got tighter when Eleanor started calling us mommy and daddy, apparently something she picked up from the other children at daycare. Who knew 2 little words could have such an effect on 2 grown adults? The first time she called me daddy when I picked her up, my heart about grew out of my chest. The first time she referred to Bobby as mommy, I thought Bobby would come totally unglued. She had just finished tying Eleanor's shoes and Eleanor said, the NKU, mommy. Bobby choked for a second, then ran into the bathroom so Eleanor couldn't see her tears. She came out of the bathroom 2 minutes later, tears still in her eyes but a big smile on her face. "Yeah, Mommy, it got to me, too," I told her. She punched me hard on the right arm. I smiled and nodded. Except for the fact that Bobby and I never engaged in any cute husband and wife touching, I thought we blended in well with the parents of Eleanor's friends at school and social events over the next several years. We told the truth about not being married to those who asked, and we never really engaged in childbirth stories, sort of deflecting and ignoring those discussions. You could have knocked me over with a feather when that Vivian showed up at our front door one Saturday morning about 4 years after I left her. Oliver, someone is here at the door for you," Bobby said from the living room while I sat at the kitchen table playing blocks with Eleanor. Eleanor followed me into the living room, and I'm not sure which one of us looked more shocked, me or Vivian. Is she yours, Q? My wife asked while looking at Eleanor like she'd seen a ghost. I had to close my gaping mouth to answer. "Well, she's ours actually," I said, pointing from Bobby to me. "Yours? She can't be yours. We're still married." I could see this wasn't going to be easy for Vivian, who looked like she was ready to crumble to the floor. I offered her a seat on our sofa, and she quickly sat down. "Calm down, Viv. Bobby and I aren't married, but Eleanor is still our daughter," I said. Oh, good, sort of. "We could work with that," Vivian mumbled. "What are you talking about, Vivian? Why are you here after all this time? Aren't we divorced at this point?" I fired off rapid fire. Much to my surprise, I found out I was still married to Vivian. She hadn't filed for divorce, figuring I'd come back to her for the first year. Then she and her father spent almost 2 years looking for me, before she spent another year working up the courage to finally approach me to reconcile. Reconcile? Seriously? Why? I asked in more rapid fire. 4 years isn't enough for me to have recovered from you ripping my heart out and acting like the wicked bitch of the West. Hell, a lifetime wouldn't be enough time. You know I love you. Always have. Always will, Vivian said. I made a mistake, one hell of a mistake, but still a mistake. I'm sorry for what I did, and sorry for trying to take advantage of your good nature. I figured if I hit you with a little shock and awe, I'd overwhelm you, and you'd have no choice but to go along with it. I also didn't think you'd give me up for a weekend of sex, not love. Wasn't having children and spending the rest of our lives together enough of a trade-off for a weekend of sex? You knew me better than anybody, I said. You knew how I felt about fidelity. You blatantly rubbed my face in it. I won't take that kind of disrespect from anybody, even from my loving wife. She looked around the room, her eyes stopping for a few seconds on Bobby and Eleanor. It looks like you recovered very nicely, she said. Almost like you didn't waste any time at all. By the way, your asshole boss back home really had your back. He kept telling Dad's investigators that Quincy Navarro didn't work there anymore, when you had just moved offices and started going by your middle name. Dad finally got a court order to look at Bishop's employment records, and then he remembered that your middle name is Oliver. After that, I just had to find the guts to approach you. Okay, you've approached me, I said. Even if I was the biggest dumbass in history, I've got a family now that I'd never throw away. I've got a beautiful woman whom I love and who I completely trust with my heart. She respects me and I her. We've got a beautiful daughter who we will cherish long after she grows into a beautiful woman. We are an us. I love being part of an us. Remember, once upon a time I told you there was no I in team, no I in us. My volume had risen considerably, almost to a shout. For the first time, Vivian truly looked remorseful. I took a quick look at Bobby and Eleanor. Bobby looked shocked. Eleanor looked frightened. I walked over to my girls and we hugged fiercely. I looked at my little girl and whispered, "It'll be all right, sweetie." I get it now, Q, Vivian said quietly as she looked at us. I'll file for divorce based on abandonment as soon as I get home. I don't need anything from you financially. But would I be out of line to ask you to forgive me for being a selfish bitch? I can try, Viv, but that's the best I can do. Maybe in time. I rasped. Vivian got up off the sofa, gave me a half smile, and left the apartment and, I hoped, my life forever. Bobby sent Eleanor up to her room to play. She took my hand and directed me to the sofa, sitting down next to me with our knees touching. She had a look similar to the one Eleanor did a few minutes ago. "Did you mean what you said to your wife a few minutes ago, about us being in us?" she said. "Completely," I answered. "I know you and I don't love each other like that, but I do love you. I trust you completely. I respect you and I believe you respect me as well. And I know you love us. You get it." "I do," she said simply, smiling brightly. I suppose finally having an official divorce should have helped my attitude with dating, but I knew I wasn't going to run out and start fucking every decent-looking willing woman I came across. That was never who I was before I got married, and now that I had a family, it was definitely a lower priority. I still occasionally had my fun, but I wasn't looking for the next Mrs. Navarro. Bobby dated more than I did and had a better social life than I did. We kept in constant communication about those things and made sure our daughter was always first in our planning. We also had a rule that no dates were to be brought home by either one of us for anything other than a meal. Eleanor was probably close to 11 when Bobby and I made the tough decision that she was ready to learn the truth about whom she was and whom we were. I know that on the night we were going to tell her, there were 2 adults who were sweating bullets. We had been talking about this for almost a year. The 3 of us shed a lot of tears that night. We showed Eleanor photos of her birth mother and explained her mother's relationship to both Bobby and me. We also had to explain about Angel being a bisexual and Bobby being a lesbian. Of course, we also had to explain about our decision not to give Eleanor to the state and raise her ourselves. So we're not a family by blood. We're a family by love, Bobby summed up. I know Eleanor was perplexed and anxious for several days as she worked out for herself what Bobby and I had laid on her. She was a bright child and mature for her age, and several days later it seemed to congeal in her brain. "You guys could have just let child services take me. Wouldn't that have been easier for you both?" she asked while we were eating dinner. "Doing the right thing isn't always the easy thing," I answered. "I've never regretted my decision for a minute, except maybe when you threw up birthday cake all over my new suit when you were 6, and I'm sure Mom hasn't regretted it either." A tearful Bobby nodded her head while wiping her nose with a tissue. In addition to our own friends, Bobby and I had several friends we had developed as a couple, and occasionally she and I went out for an evening with several of those friends. Bobby enjoyed dancing, so every now and then we did that. She was a better dancer than I was, but I worked hard to keep up. Our friends, most of who knew we weren't a couple, often commented how good we looked together. Bobby occasionally danced with other friends as well when we were out, but never accepted an invitation from strange men, for pretty obvious reasons. As pretty as she was, she never lacked for attention from either men or women. Most of the men who approached her took her soft rejections well, but not all. She had just returned to our table after dancing with one of our friends, John, when a guy I'm guessing to be about 10 years younger than her had a problem with her turning him down. "Oh, come on, babe, I'm better than that guy you were just dancing with, or that guy you're sitting with. Come on, give me a shot," he demanded, grabbing her wrist and trying to yank her back to the floor. I'm on the thin side at 6'2", 180, but I was still in pretty good condition at 41. And regardless, I would never let anyone handle a friend like that. I clamped down on the arm that was holding Bobby's wrist and twisted. The youngster howled in pain and released Bobby's wrist, which proved to be a big mistake. Once free of the man's grasp, Bobby turned into him and swiftly raised her right knee. Did I mention that she played soccer in college? The young man crumpled to the floor, but not before his face hit the table on the way down. By the time the bar manager and a bouncer got to our table, the young man was curled up in the fetal position with his face a bloody mess. The police were called, and after we all gave statements, we were assured that no charges would be made against Bobby or me. I appreciate the help, but Al Clarkson's daughters were taught self-defense by the time we started dating, regardless of who we were dating. "That young man made a really bad mistake tonight," Bobby said. "I like the way your dad thinks. Let's get him to teach Eleanor the next time he and your mom come out to visit," I said. We had moved into a 5-bedroom home a couple of years earlier and done some remodeling, so in effect we had the equivalent of 2 master bedrooms with en suites. We also had a large family room with a built-in snack area, so we often had Eleanor and several friends hanging at our house. Bobby and I became de facto parents to several teens, and honestly, we both loved it. I knew Bobby had been dating the same woman for about 2 months when she invited her to a Saturday dinner with Eleanor and me. I figured the woman had to be really special when Bobby kicked me out of the kitchen completely and made what I considered her best dish, veal parmigiana with spaghetti. At least visually, Stephanie Ellis was really special. If Bobby was an 8 to a 9, Stephanie was a solid 9 to a 9.5, big brown eyes, porcelain skin, curly dark brown, shoulder-length hair and the body of a Sports Illustrated swimsuit model. Damn, Dad, you need to let Mom find you a woman. She's really good at picking them, Eleanor said quietly to me soon after Stephanie showed up. Yeah, you're definitely right about that, baby, I answered. Stephanie proved to be every bit as special on the inside as she was on the outside. I liked her, Eleanor quickly fell in love with her and Bobby was over the moon in love. It was really great to see Bobby's eyes light up every time Stephanie walked into a room. I barely remembered what those days were like, but when I dug down deep into my memory bank, I did feel a twinge of jealousy. It did take Stephanie a bit of time to get comfortable with our family dynamic and the incredibly close relationship Bobby and I had forged. We were co-parents of a child we had raised since she was 2 and we were way closer than best friends. We talked about everything, from the inane to, yes, even the insane. I was surprised when I got a phone call from Stephanie a few weeks after she started coming over to the house on a regular basis. She asked if we could meet for lunch, and she asked me not to tell Bobby. I agreed hesitantly. I was seated in a restaurant 2 days later when Stephanie walked in, spotted me and walked over to my table. I could see the envy on the faces of several men as she sat down, and I chuckled inwardly. Most times, fantasies are better than real life. After we exchanged pleasantries and ordered, Stephanie didn't waste any time getting to the heart of the matter. She explained she couldn't get a good read on Bobby's relationship with me and didn't want to get too involved with a woman who might already be in a loving relationship. She looked concerned when I smiled brightly. Wow. If only. Women as pretty as Bobby don't date guys like me, even if she wasn't a lesbian. I'll take that as a compliment of sorts, I said. But you're right, we do have a loving relationship, one that definitely takes some explaining. So, explain I did for the next hour. We both got back to work late, but before we left, Stephanie had a much more complete understanding of our family and rye whiskey. Okay, I'm in, she said. I'd love to be a part of this family. Bobby and Stephanie were married 6 months later. I gave away Bobby at the altar since her father had passed away several years earlier. 15-year-old Eleanor was one of her bridesmaids. Eleanor was the spitting image of her late biological mother, with red hair and blue eyes, and I dreaded being the father of a pretty teenager in high school, because I remembered being a teenage boy in high school. According to Bobby and Stephanie, I didn't handle it well. You can't threaten high school kids with bodily harm for kissing your daughter, Bobby protested harshly one time after Eleanor and a young man left for a date. Did you see her face? You embarrassed her completely. You're not going to meet her dates anymore, Stephanie agreed. I'm sure one of us can effectively pass on your good wishes to them in the future. Yeah, the women made me apologize. Would you be this nuts if I chose to date women, Dad? Eleanor asked. Probably not, but then you'd have to deal with Mom and Stephanie. That certainly wouldn't be any easier for your date, I mentioned. Eleanor was reflective for several seconds. I watched several emotions play out across her face. Darn. Much as I hate to admit it, that might be even worse, she replied. I chuckled and felt better when she walked off. Are there any more feared words for a man than the phrase, "we need to talk"? The answer is an unequivocal no, but considering my family situation, I was more perplexed than fearful when Bobby said that phrase to me one Friday evening while Eleanor was out with friends. She directed me to our formal living room, a room we pretty much only used when we had guests. A nervous-looking Stephanie was already in the room, and she handed me a shot glass of what appeared to be Angel's Envy rye when I walked in and sat down on the wingback chair where she directed me. Bobby sat down up against Stephanie on the sofa. They both had glasses of white wine. I felt totally clueless. "You've got me, ladies. I completely and sincerely apologize for whatever I've done wrong, and I won't do it again, ever," I said, with all sincerity. The two women looked at each other in confusion before it dawned on Bobby. "Relax, Oliver. It's nothing like you think, but we can hang on to that apology for the next time you fuck up, okay?" Bobby chuckled. "We need a favor," she continued, suddenly hesitant. "Would it be possible? Could we borrow a cup of sperm, Oliver?" Stephanie blurted out. There was an uncomfortable silence in the room as we exchanged glances. Pardon me?" I asked. "Oh, shit. Why isn't this easier?" Bobby queried. Oliver, Stephanie and I would like to have a baby, and we would like you to provide the sperm for an in vitro fertilization. Would you do that for us?" I'll admit it took several seconds for that to register. Then I felt myself grin. Then I felt myself smile as big as I ever have. "Oh, fuck yeah!" I shouted, setting off a raucous celebration in the room as the two women jumped up down on either side of me like fifth graders on too much sugar. "How did you two pick me? Why did you pick me?" I asked when we settled down and were back in our seats. They looked at each other, both with huge grins on their pretty faces. "Picking you was way easier than asking you," Stephanie said. "I know you won't believe it, but we picked you because you're smart, personable, respectful, handsome, and fit," Bobby continued. "You're a great father and a good man. It would be amazing if our child could inherit some of those good traits." Ah, fuck. I've only cried a handful of times since I became an adult. That day was one of those. I bawled like a baby. "You know, if you guys want, I could sell you my half of the house so you guys can." "No. No. No," Bobby interrupted. "We don't want you to move. We want you here. We were kind of hoping you would help us raise our baby like you and I raised Eleanor. I think we did a pretty good job of that, don't you?" I had to admit I thought we raised a fine daughter, and truthfully, I had a great time doing so. I was somewhat concerned about what Stephanie thought, but she must have anticipated that. Studies show that all children do better with both a mother and a father in the home. Imagine how well this child could do with two mothers and a father, and a sister, before Eleanor heads off to college, Stephanie said. I gurgled a thank you between more crying and sniffling. "I love you guys. You know that?" I cried, literally. We told Eleanor of our plans that night at dinner. She jumped out of her chair and hugged Bobby and Stephanie. "Wow. I get to be a big sister. How cool is that?" she squealed in joy. 2 months later, Bobby, Eleanor, and I waited for Stephanie to emerge from their bedroom's ensuite to confirm that she was pregnant. She came out with tears of happiness sliding down her cheeks. We shared a great group hug. On a strictly personal level, I had so many emotions welling up inside my head. A little more than 13 years ago, I seemed doomed to go through life without ever having children. Now, I was just months away from having a second child. Yeah, family comes in all shapes and configurations. I was always impressed with Eleanor's intelligence and relative maturity as she aged. She always seemed to be able to handle the fact that our family was just a little different from that of most of her friends. She mentioned that she got teased occasionally, but I never heard her really complain about getting too much grief about Bobby being a lesbian, Bobby and I not being married, and the three of us each having different surnames. Of course, then we added a fourth person and a fourth surname, and then a fifth person, although the baby was given Stephanie's surname. We made the decision to keep Eleanor's last name the same as it already was because that was already on her birth certificate. She always seemed to be popular with her classmates, and through the years she and her friends did their fair share of hanging out at our house. That included her friends from the varsity soccer team and band. Adults, however, are not quite as forgiving as kids, and every now and then through the years we heard some secondhand chirping from other adults. It was mostly kept quiet when we were around, however, as I don't think very many people wanted to tangle with me, and less with Bobby, who was known to have a sharp tongue on the rare occasions she felt she needed to defend her family. Eleanor wound up as her class salutatorian and had to give a speech at graduation. I'm pretty good with words and offered to help, but she told me I had already done enough for her speech and she didn't need additional help. In fact, she never worked on it in front of me, nor in front of Bobby and Stephanie either. I guessed I'd have to wait just like everybody else to hear it. Roman Alexander Ellis was just shy of a year when I carried him into the gym behind Bobby and Stephanie on graduation day. We kept getting held up as every other woman we encountered along the way had to stop us and admire the BA. Bye. Eleanor had the second speech of the ceremony, and I had to smile when I read the program and saw her speech was entitled, "There's No I in Team." The gist of the speech was about how a team effort can overcome individual weaknesses, and the importance of everyone rowing in the same direction. She used the differences in our family as an example of how 5 individuals can be one successful unit. I'm pretty sure I grew another inch that afternoon. There weren't many dry eyes in the house as Eleanor talked. It was a whole family outing when we took Eleanor to Arizona State University for her freshman year of college. We left Santa Fe 5 days early and did all sorts of touristy things before leaving her. As we were about to drive off, we lined up in front of her for final hugs. I was last online, and as I reflected back on it later I realized the order was not random. "Promise me, Dad, that you'll do a better job of looking for a good woman," she said to me quietly while the others headed back to the car. "I know it wasn't a priority for you while I was at home, but now that I'm gone, Mom has a good woman. You need one, too." "I'll try, baby, but I can't promise," I responded just as quietly. "Good women like Stephanie don't grow on trees, you know." I suppose it was only natural that Roman called me Daddy as he first started to talk, and my heart always seemed to grow when he did that. What surprised me was that he called both Bobby and Stephanie Mommy, and they somehow always knew to which one he was referring. I couldn't hear any discernible difference in his pronunciation of the word, but the two women somehow had it figured. 2 years after graduating from Arizona State University, Eleanor gave me the extreme thrill of being able to walk her down the aisle to be married. That was just about the only thing I had to do for the wedding, as my daughter, Bobby and Stephanie did all the heavy lifting, all while smiling and laughing. All I did was pay my share and keep 7-year-old Roman out of the way. Jack Lassiter seemed to be a very nice young man, but that still didn't stop me from threatening him with physical violence if he ever laid a hand on my little girl. I told him I would never interfere in his marriage, except if he ever abused Eleanor. When he said he understood and agreed, it was in a choked voice, because I had him in a single-arm chokehold at the time we had this discussion. Sue me. She's my little girl, and I just wanted my future son-in-law to realize that actions have consequences. I may have been in my mid-50s, but I was still in good physical condition and hit the gym 3 days a week. The wedding went off without a hitch, and I made sure that I was going to enjoy my daughter's big day. I visited at every table of guests, ate good food, drank good liquor and danced with a lot of women. I was standing talking with several friends when a sprite of a woman with shoulder-length silver hair with purple streaks down the side strode up to me, grabbed my right hand and pulled me toward the dance floor. "You have a minimum height limit on your dance partners, stud," she asked as she pulled me to the floor among a lot of laughing from those standing close. "In case you're wondering, I'm Aunt Deb," the purple-haired sprite said as we pulled up real estate on the dance floor. "I'm Jack's mom's best friend. I changed your new son-in-law's diapers occasionally back in the day. My nephew has had nothing but good things to say about you, and he warned me about your killer chokehold, too." She smiled brightly, showing me flawless teeth and dancing blue eyes. I gave her what I thought was a subtle visual examination of her body, noticing she was built like a gymnast with small boobs and a powerful-looking lower body and legs. The first 2 songs were fast and I found she could move that cute body well. The next was a slow one, and while I tried to leave a respectable amount of space between us, she practically molded herself to me from the get-go. "I can tell somebody hits the gym on a regular basis," Deb said. We went to the bar hand in hand to get a drink after that. I was pretty sure she was marking her territory. I certainly didn't mind, but if she were, she would first have to get past the American version of the Spanish Inquisition, Bobby and Stephanie. I led her over to our table and sat her down after introducing her. I was pleased that my closest 2 friends in all the world gave her 30 seconds to get comfortable before the interrogation began in earnest. "I'm going to the bar to get you another drink." "I know you're going to need it," I said with a broad smile as I got up. Jack's mother came up to me at the bar, a huge smile on her face as she looked at Deb sitting at my table with Bobby and Stephanie. "She's a real pistol, but I've heard that you three are super protective of each other." "Let's see how she takes this grilling," Marcia Lassiter said. "Give it a few minutes before you head back." That's exactly what I did. Marcia filled me in on some of Deb's background. She was a year younger than me at 55, and had been married for 15 years before she caught her husband cheating on her about 10 years ago. "She kicked him in the balls and then kicked him out," Marcia said. I went back to my table 5 minutes later to see the three women laughing hysterically. For some reason, I didn't feel nearly as comfortable as when I left. 2-year-old Kayla Lassiter was running around our sprawling house with our 2 Labrador retrievers, giggling hysterically while her parents sat sipping iced tea at our kitchen table with 4 of her 6 grandparents. Jack and Eleanor lived about 45 minutes west of us and spent a lot of time at our house with our first grandchild. Jack's parents, Marcia and Tom, admitted to being a little jealous at how often we got to see Kayla, so we invited them to spend a week with us at Christmas so all 6 grandparents and Uncle Roman could enjoy the holiday together. Marcia was an easy sell since it also gave her a chance to see her best friend, Deb, who she hadn't seen in the year since Deb and I married and Deb moved to Santa Fe. Tom was a little tougher sell. He admitted to me privately when the two arrived that he was uncomfortable around Bobby and Stephanie, never having close personal contact with lesbians before. "They're just regular married people the same as you and Marcia are. That's really all you need to know, dude. I trust either one of them with my wallet, my wife, my daughter, my granddaughter, and my life," I explained to him. "Well, I have to admit they're both very attractive women," he said. "I always thought lesbians were ugly and masculine looking. That's definitely not the case with them." I could see he looked uncomfortable when I laughed heartily at his statement. "Good Lord, no," I chuckled back. "Don't overthink things, Tom. They're still women. They've each got more shoes than you and me put together." Deb was everything in a wife I could have wanted and didn't have a clue I needed. I was on the laid-back side and she was anything but. I didn't think I lacked for energy, but the woman just couldn't sit still. The first spring she lived with us I had to till her out a garden. We, read me, then spent hours planting all sorts of salad vegetables, while she supervised. I gave her a hard time about being part cat, because everyone knows cats are nature's best supervisors. Bobby and Stephanie fell in love with her figuratively almost as fast as I did literally. That didn't stop them, though, from warning her before we got married that they would both pound her to dust if she broke my heart. She seemed pretty shook up when she told me that the day after they made their announcement to her. "I'm pretty sure they weren't kidding you, babe," I said, serious as a heart attack. "We have each other's backs all the time. I know they weren't kidding me. I don't plan on ever hurting you, but if I do, I won't be hanging around here. I'll pull a runner so fast your head will spin. That's called self-preservation," she said. Deb convinced Marcia and Tom that Santa Fe was a great place to retire, and that's exactly what they did 8 years later. They actually retired a little earlier than they planned when the home next to ours went up for sale. Tom came fully on board when he found out Bobby was also a Premier League soccer fan. Bobby's team was Arsenal, while Tom's favorite was Crystal Palace. It was like I imagined it would be sitting in an English pub when a game was on, although it did get a little contentious when their two teams faced each other. "Fuck off, bitch and eat shit, old man" weren't uncommon phrases when we all gathered to watch Arsenal and Crystal play square off. Football fans, soccer to Americans, are way more intense than baseball fans, Deb, Stephanie, Marcia, and I came to learn. Jack and Eleanor didn't bring the 3 grandchildren around when Arsenal and Crystal Palace played. It was a beautiful Santa Fe summer evening and I was sitting on my porch swing on my deck behind my house sipping on a shot of Jameson Black Barrel Irish whiskey, thinking about how fortunate I was. My oldest grandchild came out the back door and sat down next to me, leaning her skinny body up against mine. For the umpteenth time, I noticed that she was a young doppelganger for her late grandmother with her dark red hair and bright blue eyes. "What ya thinking about, Grando?" she asked, calling me by her special name for me. "I was thinking about my life, about how lucky I've been," I answered. "How are you lucky?" she queried. I took a sip of whiskey as I tried to figure out how to phrase my answer to a 9-year-old. "Well, baby, you know when something bad happens, but everything turns out good anyway? That's kind of what happened for me. She squirmed a bit alongside me, and when I looked down at her face, I could see by her yes that she was thinking hard. Then she broke into a huge smile when understanding came to her. Yeah, like when I scraped my knee the other day and Grandma Deb gave me ice cream, she enthused. I smiled down at Kayla and she beamed at me, knowing she had the right answer. Something like that, baby. Something like that.